The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and thanks for joining us on another DevOps.com webinar. We've got a great webinar lined up for today. Good friend of mine, Pete Chestna, Director of Developer Engagement at Veracode, is joining us. We'll talk more about Pete in just a second. Today's webinar, by the way, is sponsored by Veracode, which is now a CA Technologies company. And the name of the webinar is Full Spectrum Engineering. And we'll get into more of that in a second. Before we do, for those of you who are not familiar, or maybe just a good review for those who are, we use GoToWebinar here for our webinars on DevOps.com, and I want to make sure you're all familiar with our GoToWebinar control panel for a couple of important reasons. Number one, we're very much interested in your questions, and Pete is looking forward to answering them. We've set aside time for it. And we have a section of the control panel where you can actually ask your questions in real time. We may try to answer them in real time, or we'll answer them at the set aside time, but you don't have to worry about forgetting your questions or what have you. You could type them in, as stream of consciousness as they come in, pop into your brain. They'll be queued in here, and we will answer them as best we can. If we don't have enough time on the show today to answer, because we have a written record of it, we'll try to get those questions answered in writing to you and to the audience as soon as possible. So please use the question section of the webinar, type your questions in as they pop in your mind. I know the first question we always get is, is this webinar being recorded and will the slides be available? Yes and yes. We are recording. It will be available on our DevOps TV YouTube channel, as well as the slides from today's presentation. So hopefully that's out of the way. Wanted to draw your attention to another section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and that is the chat section down at the bottom for most of you. We don't use chat for questions here. The question section are for questions. Chat is if you are having a problem, perhaps the audio is not working, or the slides aren't advancing, or something else is not going on, but you could still use the chat section. We do have Deb and our team of GoToWebinar engineers ready, to answer your questions and try to make sure this is, we could do our best to remedy any situation you may have. So please use the chat section if you have any technical problems or issues. Use the question section if you have questions for Pete or myself. And then finally, we will be using an interactive feature of GoToWebinar today, and that is the polling questions. So you'll see it intervals through the webinar. We will be polling the audience for questions, answers to certain questions. And I really, did I say really, encourage you to answer these questions as best you can. They're usually short, multiple choice stuff. But it gives Pete a better sense of where the audience is so he can tailor his comments to the audience. And number two, just making it interactive makes it for a better webinar. So please don't make me beg you or ask again and again. When the polling questions come up, please do me a favor and answer them, and I think we'll all be better for it. That being said, let me now turn things over to my friend Peter. Peter, you there?
I am here, Alan.
All right. I gave you the big build-up. I know you'll live up to it. If you're ready to rock and roll, we can get started.
I am. Yeah, I mean, this is an idea that came to me at RSA in San Francisco, just looking at the landscape and looking at where engineering was headed, all of the talks and all of the, the buzz around this thing. So I'm really excited to share it with people. So a little bit about me. I've been a software developer for over 25 years. I've been at Veracode since 2006, so that gives me, a little more than 10 years of AppSec experience. And I've been, as a practitioner from an engineering perspective, gone from waterfall to agile to DevOps and DevSecOps, and also from monolith to microservice. And I consult now regularly on DevSecOps best practices. And to give you an idea of how long I've been doing web app development, my first day at one of my first startups, I was actually presented with 2 shrink wrap boxes of browsers back when you had to pay for them, Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer. So it goes back quite a ways. I've been doing this for a long time. So now let's talk about DevOps and a DevOps team, because this is something that I know, Alan, you've heard a lot expressed in different ways with different ideas around what this means. People think of DevOps as a person or as a facility or as a group, and to me, a DevOps team is someone that owns a product from cradle to grave. So typically, what people think of is this, right? They're a group that goes in, writes some CI/CD stuff, does some automation, puts some tooling in place, and gets everything ready for applications to be deployed. Would you say that? Would you agree with that, Alan?
Sorry, Pete, I was on mute. Yes, I agree 100%.
Really, but really, if you read through the literature, if you go through, the DevOps handbook, and you read the other books on the subject matter, this is what you need. You need a team that learns together and progresses through this life cycle, owns everything from cradle to grave of a feature, of a product, of a function. Really, they're there to learn and do those quick feedback loops that you talk about in the third way of ever increasingly amplifying those feedbacks. So, job market. Here's my premise. The cause of this is multifold. So one is this movement to microservice architecture. In the older days, when I first started my career, we were talking about giant monolithic applications. They were only released a couple times a year. Deriving to microservices where there's just a piece of the functionality, and you need to sew together tens, dozens, hundreds of these things to create a product, has led to the fact that you need to move very, very quickly. Secondly, the teams have shrunk. So again, in the waterfall days, it wasn't uncommon to have 50 or 100 people on a team working together to do these big, giant releases. Now, as we moved to Agile, we've got these smaller cross-functional teams of less than a dozen people, and you need to think more about the things that you are responsible for as an individual contributor on this team. Certainly the DevOps methodology, this idea of continuous integration, continuous delivery, the idea that we want to move extremely quickly, single piece flow. If you look at like the Toyota production system, I want to be able to take an idea as a single developer all the way from the idea to production all by myself. This need for speed. So this happens in a lot of verticals where disruptors are coming in greenfield environments and able to overtake the giants that are doing the longer release cycles and bring functionality to the market faster and be really reactive to them. And it's really causing a lot of disruption in those big environments. Those big companies are here to say, how can I take advantage of this? How do I move faster? So the effect of this is changing the profile for what we need to hire for my DevOps team. And again, remember that DevOps team needs to own everything. Developers need to know more and do more than ever before. This was something that started with Agile. So when we made the move to Agile, you combine the concerns of development plus quality, and those two concerns together made me start thinking about maybe doing test-driven development or acceptance criteria-driven development, those kind of things where testing becomes the first thing I think about and not the last thing I think about. We also need to think about how that cross-functional team has accountability, the things they are responsible for in a proper definition of done, and the kind of being able to build that team to be able to take the entire product line and bring it to market and bring it to those developers. So we're going to pause here for our first poll question.
Everyone, our first question. For those moving to or perhaps already using DevOps, who's responsible for deploying and operating the application? Is it a separate ops team, a specific member, single member of the app team? It's the job of everyone on the team, or it's a fully automated CI/CD pipeline. So guys, if you could, again, hopefully one of those four choices fits your situation. We've got almost half of you voted. Let's close voting off in another 5, 4, 3. Come on, we could use a few more votes here. Great. 2, 1. All right, we got most of you voting, and let's see what the poll shows us. Okay, here we go. So Pete, ooh, okay. I like it. Over a third, 35% of the people, Pete, said it's the job of everyone on the team. Now, of course,
That's incredible.
A third said there's a separate ops team that does deploying and, opt afterwards.
And this is really typical of what I see in the industry, and I'd love your opinion on this. It's really, built out of those silos that still exist, that they're trying to move to this new paradigm but haven't gotten there yet.
I don't know, Pete. Call me Doubting Thomas, but I look at it and say, wow, 69%. So the separate ops team that does deployment and operations, to me, that's fully 1/3 of the people, and that's sort of old-time silo to me. Then roughly the same amount, a little bit over 1/3, say it's the job of everyone on the team. It sounds like, okay, we don't have silos. I probably want to dig in and understand what that team is made up of. But, it sounds like you want to call it a DevOps or a cross-functional team. It sounds like a cross-functional team. I'm surprised that fully automated CI/CD is as high as it is, frankly. Right?
I am too.
Yeah, that may be due to our DevOps.com audience, being more open to DevOps. But anyway.
Here's the good thing in there is that 17% that said it's a member of the application team. That means that they're trying to break those silos, and they have a specialist that's in there doing that. So they're at least moving in that direction of making it everyone's job.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay, so let's talk about what's driving this need for change. And really, there are multiple facets. The first one is the architecture. So if you look at, this idea of architecture around end tier, you had silos of responsibility. You had someone that was, or a team of people, the DBAs, that would be responsible for your data layer, doing your schemas and data updates and writing SQL queries and writing stored procedures. Someone that was responsible for business layer things. And, you would hear this a lot 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, I do business logic, or I do application server. And then again, when you're looking at the UIs for these, whether that be a full strength desktop application or something that's browser-based, or your mobile applications, either in HTML5 or something that's specific to the hardware platform you're on, each of those required a specialty, especially as they were coming to fruition. You didn't have anyone that had the capability to stream across these layers, and they were all released kind of separately. So you move from that to more of a microservice model, where you're talking about very small, non-complex software that does a specific role. The whole intention of these microservices is something that you can quickly learn what it does and how it does it, has a simple interface to it. You could throw it out and rewrite it if you needed to. So this idea of carrying this technical debt that becomes so burdensome is supposed to get fixed by this microservice model, where I can take it and say, that doesn't really do the job for me anymore. We're going to move to something else, and I can completely replace it and kind of plug it back into that system. Technology evolution, especially in web applications, again, follow that model of I needed specialists that became generalists as the things matured. So in Web 1.0, it was static HTML and full page reloads. Every time you would go to a URL, you'd have to reload the browser. Very simple architectures. In 2.0, as we started to introduce AJAX and DHTML and JavaScript really started to take shape, you started to be able to load things behind the scenes and go gather some information and update the UI, gave the user a better perceived experience. And on the other side, we still had that monolithic and end-tier application sitting behind it, where now in the new world, we have this flood of technologies in the front end, right? HTML5, new CSS, we have Angular in there. People are building their applications API first, so they build it headless because the whole intent is we're going to do some integrations. Every single system and every person that I talk to wants to integrate with their tool set, but they don't want to do it through the UI. They want to go to an API, and they want to make some calls and have it perform the actions that it was meant to do and kind of go around that UI altogether. And this is how you get to this DevOps of automate the world. So when we're doing that now, on the back end, we have some very simple interfaces. Now we've gone to REST. We have Node and JavaScript backends for that. We have all these microservices, and now we have bounded context, so we're not deploying huge database schema updates every time that we go deploy our application. So things are getting smaller and faster. It's easier to see someone being able to take a function from the UI all the way down into that back-end context and into those microservices. So if I was to hire someone for my team 5 years ago, this is the kind of model that I would look at, you know, the full stack web developer that can create me some UI stuff based upon wireframes for my UX team, do the scripting behind it, make it look right and act right, and go back into the back end all the way down to the database to cause changes to occur inside of the application. So this is a very deep stack, but this is kind of the state of the art today. These are what people are hiring. When you go look at job postings, they want a full stack developer to be able to come in and action this functionality. And this is really driven into those, you know, kind of monolithic applications. So this is also driven by methodology and team size. You know, in the days when we had waterfall and 50-person teams, it's not uncommon you would have 2 or 3 DBAs on a project. You would have a bunch of UI specialists on a project, middle tier, all those other functions inside of your team to collaborate on this project. But as you start moving into the agile methodologies and then finally into DevOps, where we're now cycling so fast that we might be releasing 10 times a day. And in an application environment where the application is actually made up of dozens or hundreds of microservices, I'm deploying all the time. You know, that application team may deploy 10 times a day, but across my enterprise, I may be deploying hundreds of times a day. So from a team size and release time frame perspective, again, that 50 plus, we're talking about a release frequency of 1 to 4 times a year. Move to Agile, and now we've got a team size of 6 to 12. It's a very small team. You no longer have the luxury of having specialists across the team. And even if you did, you wouldn't be able to get anything done because there would be so many handoffs and park states and works in progress that are going on that you really never would get to where you want to be. Moving into DevOps now, again, that release frequency of hundreds of times a year for an application team is not uncommon. And to move at that pace means I can't have a lot of handoffs. I need someone that can augment functionality that is already there and build things from stem to stern. So distributed responsibility. So the way software is created and deployed today, developer will pick up and build a story, right? They'll create the software, they'll check that in, and then a quality engineer is going to go through and look at that and test the functionality of the software. Security will come in later on, validate that it passes their requirements, creating bugs along the way, obviously, and doing this kind of batch work. Management does the approval of the software, so it's not uncommon for you to have a change request email, and this is largely built out of segregation of duties and being able to audit the changes in your environment, where I'm going to ask my management, can I release the software? Can I change production? From a hardware point of view, you know, now that in those days we were non-cloud, we'd have our own data centers. Someone would have to go and create the physical infrastructure. They'd have to rack and stack and cable hardware and get all that stuff up and running. When IT would then come in and install the operating system and configure the networks and all those other things, operations would then move bits onto that hardware and monitor it in the production environment, whether that be, you know, your data center or somebody else's. And we're going to break here for poll question number 2.
Fantastic. Okay, Pete, Question number 2, what is your team's relationship with the application security team at your company? So answer number 1 is what security team? Answer number 2, we talk to them when we have a release candidate for test. We test regularly with tools during our software development lifecycle, and we are accountable for security and work with them in hopefully
every phase of the SDLC.
We do. I wonder what happens if we are the app security team. But anyway, if we can have your answers, we'll close things off in just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you everyone for voting. And survey shows, okay. I love it. 30, our biggest percentage, slightly under a third, test regularly with tools, throughout the life cycle. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, and if you combine that with totally accountable for security, we're over 57% of people that feel like they are responsible and I am accountable for the security of the product. That's awesome news.
Pete, you and I were speaking prior to going live today. I've been doing the DevSecOps thing at RSA now for 3-4 years. And in just that amount of time, it really does amaze me. The security is everyone's responsibility, and the increased cooperation and sharing between what used to be very siloed, dev team versus the security folk. And it is encouraging to see a number like 57%, right? That's a clear majority, and hey, that's good stuff.
We're moving in the right direction.
Then Pete, you say what security team? But well, another day. Anyway, let's turn things back to you, Pete.
All right, thanks. So let's look at tomorrow. So we looked at today, which was, again, those segments of responsibility across the spectrum. Now, as we take a look at what's happening today when people are creating software, whether this be some kind of basement project, a hackathon project, or a proper functioning DevOps team, today the individual takes the story and builds the feature. They create functional tests. Now, whether that's test-driven development, whether they write the test first and then the code, or they're writing unit tests and functional tests after the fact, they feel like they are responsible and accountable to make sure that that works prior to check-in, because again, the idea is I check it in, it goes to production, which means everything I check in is a release candidate. I have to think of it like that. They validate the security of the feature by running with the right set of tools and the right set of codified procedures that they understand. I understand what's expected of me from a security point of view, and I make sure that I'm going to clear that bar by running the tools that are provided to me. I use a CI/CD pipeline to approve the release of the feature. So the basis of this is automation, but it has to be automation that you trust. So by building that in, especially in these greenfield environments, I start with the tests that I trust, and I augment them every single time. I build up to the point where the pipeline knows whether the software is ready to go, and that's really what you want, because anytime you put people in the way, anytime you put a longer process in the way, it just delays your time to value. We terraform environments now. This is an interesting one. If you think about, the movement from physical infrastructure to a cloud infrastructure, now I'm doing, Docker containers, and I'm picking the operating system that I'm going to run with and the software that's installed on that, where I now take that Docker container, I add a whole bunch of supporting libraries into it and configure the operating system myself. Then I'm going to install my software into that container and move it into a production environment. These are things that software developers have never had to think about. This was IT, this was systems engineering, this was our operations team. We're really taking all of that as our own responsibility. Now think of what that means to us. The amount of things that you need to learn and understand, at least at a basic level, if not at an intermediate or an advanced level, to make sure that you're not doing something wrong. There's a whole bunch of gaps that can be built into, choosing the wrong container and not updating it properly. And, what happens, what does a patch cycle mean in this context? Because in the old days, IT and systems engineering would roll out their patches quarterly and update all of the hardware. Now this is virtual and I have thousands of instances. I need to think differently about how I do that to say, I need to rebuild my software, and maybe it's not the software that's changed, but the underlying infrastructure that I've terraformed. I need to go patch the version of the operating system I'm working on and redeploy it to production and not really incur any change in the functionality of the product. So this one is kind of mind-blowing to me. And then again, the team is responsible to monitor that software in production. And this is where these cycles of learning, amplifying my feedback loops, understanding that I've failed, figuring out what to do about it, building that into new testing that I can then trust at a greater extent, and learning over time as a team on how this software operates inside of a production environment. Absolutely critical. So you look across this, I don't see silos anymore. There are no silos. Now there is a person or a set of people, a small team that's responsible for doing this, which is what made me come up with this idea of saying, hey, this is a completely different context. This isn't T-shaped engineers that we've heard of in the past, where, I might be strong in UI, but I can do database and I can do these other things. It's not the full spectrum engineer, which is multi-technology. We're talking about becoming multidiscipline as an engineer. So I need to understand all of these various aspects of what it takes to take an idea and move it into production in front of my customer. So we'll start with the first one, which is the obvious one. I need to be a great developer. So I need to keep up with trends. I need to go to conferences, understand the ramifications of certain designs and implementations, Big O, all of the things that we were trained in college. And staying on top of standards. The web standards are moving very, very fast compared to where they were 15 years ago. And I need to make sure that I keep up with that, because those are the technologies that are going to get me to be able to create my applications faster. Open source ecosystem, the frameworks and libraries, there is literally dozens or hundreds of these that come out all the time. And they are great aids to getting developers to go faster, right? We piece together applications anymore. Typically, when I see a microservice, there's maybe 5%, tops 10% that's first-party code. The rest of it is libraries that have been glued together and configured in such a way that you've created this new microservice with this unique function in it. So it's not the case of I'm writing, tens or 20 or 30,000 lines of code. A lot of this is coming from the open source ecosystem, and we need to understand that. Secondly, quality. So this was, again, the one that we picked up when we went through our Agile transformations. Being able to build quality into the application, the feature that we are working on, the story that we're writing, thinking about writing my tests up front so that way when they pass, I know that I'm complete. Writing good unit tests and regression tests, understanding how it will scale and how it will work with multiple instances of the microservice running and who's going to take care of what. How things connect together inside of this world is critical. So one of the things you'll typically see inside of these pipelines is rules around code coverage from a testability point of view, that if the code coverage goes down, I'm going to fail because clearly someone's not taking care of the ongoing work of making sure that we're properly testing. So it goes back to that test that I trust paradigm. I can't have a CI/CD pipeline that automatically deploys to production if I can't trust the underlying tests that are making those decisions. That's where people start to get involved and we start to slow down that process. So this is like front of mind for everybody. Understanding deployment. So back to that talk track around individuals or a small team being able to do this. Understanding containerization and infrastructure as code. The idea that I should never SSH into my production environment and make a configuration change and say I'm done. If I ever have to do that, that's something I need to take back to configuration, make a modification, check it in, and make that part of the infrastructure moving forward, and destroy that container and create a new instance. So you need to make sure that you're always moving those things back to the left, back into when you're using them inside of your quality environment so that we don't have configuration shifts that cause tests to perform differently in one environment versus another. Because the last thing that you can afford in DevOps is for it to take you hours or days to figure out a problem and try to recreate it in your quality environment. It becomes even harder if you have this kind of configuration drift. So again, version controlled It's got to be repeatable. It needs to be on demand. All of those things that bake into the CI/CD pipeline to be able to move this software. Operations. It's not about debug, right? It's not about throwing a bunch of stuff in the log and, I'll go scratch through that later. I need to turn that data into information. I need to understand how my software behaves, the kind of things that should trigger either an alert to me or some kind of response in the software, making my software anti-fragile, meaning that if things start crumbling around it or things start crumbling inside of it, that it doesn't take down the entire system. So we're moving to a whole new world of trying to debug remotely. So I deploy the software, it starts behaving weird. I can take a look at what's coming back in my telemetry. I have information radiators on my wall that turn green, yellow, red that show me things are working as expected. And these are things that you learn over time. You add to this telemetry, make it better. Again, part of the job of a developer. Security. So obviously with Veracode, this is a very important part of how I think about software deployment. It's increasingly becoming a world where you need to think about security, and if you're going to go fast, you need to shift left. So I need to have tools that can operate inside of my IDE, that can give me results in seconds, that can show me the vulnerabilities that I've created, how to fix them, and allow me to easily integrate those back in, that will educate me as I go. And this is probably one of the biggest gaps in software development today, is the understanding of security. It's not that developers aren't smart enough or that they don't want to, it's that they just don't know. It's a carrying cost of every company out there to train their developers on how to write secure code. So by making it part of the definition of done, giving them the proper education and the right tooling to be able to find and fix it early when it's the least expensive, also drives that further into that education piece. So we're going to shift over now to, so that's great, I think I get it, but I'm a DBA or I'm a UI guy, I'm a specialist. What happens to me in this world? So this pendulum that goes between generalists and specialists as new technologies and new ways of thinking come online, where you want to go find those specialists that can get you there faster. And then the tool sets and documentation become better and the training becomes better, and we move towards generalists, and it can be soaked back into the proper ecosystem. So what now? So what I'll tell you is that the way that I think about this, and I'll take security as an example, there are, and I've heard this in a number of conferences that I've spoken at around DevSecOps, this idea of having security champions, a guild of people that understand and stand up to say, I am responsible for thinking about security as part of my job. It's one of the things that I provide value to my application team. I go in there, and when we're grooming stories, I'm not only grooming them for functional, I'm also grooming them for non-functional security aspects because I have some additional training. So you can do that through this guild model where you build these pockets of expertise that then drives into the general population, and people across your company get involved in these. So as you're building them, you want to identify those leaders and practice experts that say, you are great at this one functional area. Now you're going to become more of a generalist in other things, and I expect you to become one of these full spectrum engineers, but I want you to drive this guild because this is your specialty. Being able to help us set the right level of engagement, the right training, the right standards across the company, help us set that up and hold those, birds of a feather type meetings where we get together and talk about the problems that we're having and solutions that other people may have, and really drive that through the company. So that's one of the places where you might use those experts. And we'll pause again for poll question 3.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, this is our last poll question, so let's get everyone answering it. How would you describe yourself as an engineer? Technology specialist, in other words, you're a GUI person, a DB person, service layer. A T-shaped person, primary specialty and maybe some generalist capabilities sitting on top of that. A full stack engineer. I can create the application from soup to nuts and run it as well. Maybe it's I can develop the application and run it as well. Or a full spectrum engineer. I'm mastering multiple disciplines. within this. So if we can have your answers, we'll close things off in just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we got 3/4 of you voting. Interesting.
Well, that's really interesting. I did not expect that at all.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't expect T-shaped to be almost half of the people.
That's true, and I didn't expect to see so many people that self-identify as kind of that full spectrum idea of mastering multiple disciplines. That's incredibly high for me.
Well, so I got to tell you, Pete, my take on it, and I, what do I know? But I think that's a result of so many people who were, early in our careers, what we would consider people on the ops side of the house, or maybe QA folks, picking up new skill sets, learning to code a little bit, write a little script, do a little of this. And it winds up, even the security people, Pete, right? How many security people who have been in security, let's say more than 10 years, actually went, started in their IT career as a security person? Maybe they were a network engineer.
Or a developer, yeah.
Right, or a help desk, or a developer. The interesting thing about IT is over time and new technologies, you drift into, what's going to pay the bills or what you find exciting.
Yeah, I would have expected the T-shaped and full stack to be reversed. I would have seen more full stack engineers and less T-shaped engineers.
Yeah. Well, when you start looking at DevOps teams and you got T-shape versus comb shape and all that, the T-shape is the dominant form. I thought that was more of a team concept rather than an individual. But nevertheless, the numbers speak for themselves. All right.
All right.
Go ahead, Pete.
All right, so on to conclusions, kind of wrapping things up at this point. The way we build software is changing today, right? We're moving from this model of handoffs and moving between departments, between disciplines, to a place where the team needs to own that whole process. The teams are shrinking, so I no longer have the ability to have specialists on every team. I need to become more cross-functional myself. Even if we weren't getting to this DevOps phase, this is true in Agile. That team of 6 to 12 trying to figure out how to build all this functionality, that's another place where we're starting to see that expansion. DevOps just exacerbates that because of the speed that we want to go, because we don't want to have handoffs, because we don't want to batch functionality into a release. We want to take one idea, release it to production, and then have the next one queue up and go right behind it. Velocity expectations. So again, if you're working in one of the verticals, financial is the one that really comes to mind for me. You are being disrupted constantly by greenfield development teams that can come in and quickly iterate on an idea, where you have still mainframe applications that work on a much longer time scale. Compared to DevOps, it's glacial. So how do you innovate against that kind of backdrop and that kind of cost that you're bearing? Key to all of this is accountability. If part of the charter of that team is not, hey, you are accountable for how that works in production, you are accountable for the fact that it is secure, you're accountable that you've created the containers correctly and have thought about how they're hardened, that the stuff functions as a matter of course. If they don't feel that accountability, then they're not going to drive to those kind of solutions, and they're not going to take that responsibility and change the way they operate. So in my mind, this brings up the need to build this kind of full spectrum engineer that is at its basis cross-training and multidiscipline, and help the teams come up to speed on this, give them the tools that they need, help them figure out how to measure themselves. Changing your hiring profile if you're looking at what to go and get from the industry today. I always like to think of lifetime learners. So a lot of the questions that I ask during interviews are, hey, what'd you learn about today? Or what are the things that you're curious about that you're going after? And it's not necessarily work related. There are plenty of things in my life where I want to go learn a specific skill, and I go out and I start doing it. And you want to find those kind of people that are self-starters and say, well, that's interesting. I don't understand that. I want to go do that. And build those guilds to help socialize across your company and build the right standards and the right training into your company. So at this point, I am happy to take some questions.
You have a bunch of questions here, and let's see what we've got. So let's start with, first of all, Gervais Johnson, I think his name is. Gervais, you had a ton of great comments. The problem is, how do we work them into questions? So I'll do my best, but I do appreciate the comments that you made, and we'll pass those along to Pete as well. But let me ask this question first, Pete. At what point do you think the volume of releases becomes detrimental? Customer gets sort of new release fatigue, if you will.
Oh, it's a great question. So by deploying to production does not mean we're putting something in front of a customer. Typically, the way these are done is a dark release. So if I think about my own company and our product, we can't be hitting the company. So we can't be hitting the customer with a new feature all the time. First of all, there's a documentation issue. There's also a support issue. So if they call up where something's not working as expected, have I trained the people that are running my support organization? So how do I get in front of that? So we do things called, dark releases, where I'm going to put a feature switch in front of it. I'm going to deploy it dark. It still operates in the environment. I can turn it on for some subset of the population. So if there's places where you want to do some manual testing, or you want to try out a feature on a small subset of your population, you can do that through these feature switches such that you roll it out open to a couple of friendly people. They bang on it, and then you find out, hey, this is what I want to do. And then your quote-unquote releases really just become software that turns on these feature switches for some set of features. So it might be, I'm going to turn some of these on for early access for some friendly customers. And here's a set of things that I'm going to turn on for general availability that may have been in production for days or weeks, but that software is already there waiting for it. So that's the way I think about that. It's really about reducing your risk as you're deploying the software and not necessarily bombarding your customers with features.
Got it. Good stuff. Just a comment again from this fellow Gervais. Peter, based on the answers we saw in our polling questions, do you think our audience was maybe more slanted towards mature, larger organizations, or do you think that's more of what's out there?
Actually, I do think that we are seeing more. So in this particular webinar, I do think it was slanted that way. That's definitely a good point. The numbers were higher in a lot of areas than I expected, and this might be largely because people are looking to find peers and brethren in this new space.
Got it. Next question. Are people actually hiring for developers who can do all of this, so sort of this full spectrum, or is this more of a future thing in the next few years? Do you have any specific examples of job postings or companies or type of companies? Are they vendors who are looking for it, by IT's business system owners, or, if you have any background on that, Peter?
Sure. So I've spoken at in Stockholm, in Toronto, in Nashville, specifically on this topic. This always raises a lot of interest. We've had a lot of side discussions around this where people see that that's the direction that things are going. So I can't point to any job listings today that say, hey, I need a full spectrum engineer. But there are a lot of cases where we're hiring for DevOps teams. We don't know what to call it, but we want someone that understands how containerization works and how to do monitoring, because they're going to be wearing a pager. So we're not calling it that, but there are places where we are looking for some kind of that multifaceted engineer, where maybe there's a cross-functional team that's lost someone that they need to bring back that skill set. So it's never just a developer. It's always a developer plus. It's not just a quality person that can write automated tests. It's quality plus, because there's not enough work to keep that one person occupied in just that one area. So we're looking for that kind of multidiscipline engineer today, just not at this kind of scale.
Got it. Next question. I'm a developer. I'm reading this, Pete. I'm a developer, but I believe that the OS side of things should still be done by a sysadmin, just maybe one who can code things. What do you think about that, Pete?
That's certainly possible. But again, if you think about, if you think about how the software is going to get created in the first place, that container isn't something that you're going to create every time you pick up a new story. When you're creating this microservice, you might have a specialist come in that understands the operating system layer a little bit better than the rest of the team to help bootstrap things. The question is not, can I build the thing from scratch? Is, do I understand enough of it such that if I need to add a new library into this container, if I need to modify the configuration of this container, can I do that without bringing that expert back in? So again, it's less about ground zero white sheet of paper. It's more about, I've got some environment that we've created, and now I need to understand how to manipulate it and not say, oh, that's not my job, this needs to wait.
Okay, fair enough. Here's another question, and this I think was specific to one of your slides, Pete. Who validates non-functional requests?
So the product owner, in your proper Agile terminology, would be the one that would talk about acceptance criteria. Now, as I spoke about with the kind of idea around security champions, they're going to have a set of requirements that are based out of those guilds and their understanding of, if it looks like that and smells like this, then we need to do this kind of testing on it. Here are the requirements that I need to have as part of that. Now, built into every single one of those people is the idea that I don't know everything, and there are things that I'm going to get over my skis on, and when they do that, they need to bring in the experts. So these specialists that we have are not going to go unused. We're just going to use them in very pointed situations. So I would say that the team is responsible for understanding all of their functional and non-functional requirements and making sure that as part of their grooming session, they fully understand what they need to do. Now, if they need to bring in consultation around architecture or design or something like that, then they should do that as part of their grooming process and not during story execution.
Got it. All right. So, Pete, next question. I don't know if I asked this one now. For DevOps cross-functional team references, are you speaking to the app layer and above only? What about infra?
So I'm speaking about everything. So, you know, as we're creating microservices that are at the surface or not, some of these might have a thin UI, some might have no UI. We talked about, you know, creating applications as headless at first. Services are just that way. I can have a service that's headless. I could put a thin-skin Angular UI on top of that if I wanted to, but I don't really need to. So I'm talking about the whole thing. Any microservice, any DevOps team would need to have these various aspects, because moving that functionality into a production environment or into my intranet needs to move as fast as the team can.
Got it. All right, a couple other questions, Pete. So this person is still a developer in Agile and he hopes to transition to DevOps. Should I start training or should I get some training around this?
Yeah, so these are things that you can play with during hackathons or in your spare time to be able to start understanding containerization and start understanding and building your own small little microservices. You probably have some cloud compute that's available to you inside of your company. There's no reason not to start understanding this stuff. You'll actually provide more value to the Agile team that you're on if you could start to speak to these multiple aspects and speak in a more thoughtful way around security or around deployment. So it's certainly not going to hurt you in your career today, and will only help you tomorrow.
Good. Next, so this is always a question in DevOps especially, but in security as well, Pete. How do I sell it up to the boss?
So this is all about speed. If you look at, you know, creating, for instance, value stream maps of process about how the software is created, There are so many places where there is waste, where something sits in a queue waiting for someone else to pick that up, where you talk about maybe you're doing Kanban, or you have Scrumban, or you just have this agile process that you're relying on outside expertise to come help you with things. It's about moving things as quickly to the customer as you possibly can, and that means reducing those wait states, reducing those works in progress, allowing a developer or an engineer to take an idea and build it all the way out into the production environment. So having those places where you need to sit and wait for someone starts to talk in calendar time, where if I'm making a 3-line change in a file and I need to be able to deploy that, how do I do that? And being able to speak that language and understand that, that's really where you're going to start to get leverage and say, we could save money, I could go faster. The company always wants their teams to go faster, and this is one way to sell that.
Great. Pete, this next one is a question I've run into before as well, right? And it's, how do we maintain separation of duties when it comes to access to production systems? And it's a conundrum, right? We want everyone working on everything in DevOps because we're all one team. But, for those of us from the security world, we're taught separation of duties is such an important part.
Yeah, and so some of that needs to change. So if you go back to the model where I talked about the CI/CD pipeline making the decision to allow a deployment versus that auditable email entry. Now, I can still create audit logs behind that. Some of this is our interpretation of the requirements around PCI or what have you, where we say you must have separation of duties because we are creating through our pipelines audit trails of how things change. We have the audit logs in our source control systems that show what changed and by whom. So our fingerprints are all over these things. I don't think that that's a model that can persist if you're going to get to the model where DevOps wants to be, which is I can release the software as I create it. There needs to be a level of trust in the people that we employ. There needs to be a level of training so they understand their responsibilities and their accountability for the changes that they make. And there needs to be a way to go back and audit those things. So having specialists around security that can look for warning signs, or having things built into your teams around governance is going to be critical to this. But I don't think we can go back to the full world of separate silos. This is why we're trying to break away from that. This is just the next layer of that process.
Got it. Pete, we got a bunch more questions. I apologize, but we've got the time. Let's dig in. Next question is, I'm not getting the difference between a full stack engineer and a full spectrum engineer. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Absolutely. So in my mind, so I consider myself to be a full stack engineer. That's what I came to Veracode as a developer. And that was, I can take an idea, I can create UI, I can build that into the services, I can create database queries that serve and change the data behind the user, and script all of that stuff and put that all together into a functional piece of code. Now, the difference between that and full spectrum is I need to be able to develop the code, but now I need to think about does it function correctly? That whole aspect of testing is not something that I came into Veracode needing to do. The idea that, yes, we would write unit tests, but that really wasn't the emphasis then. It looks like it works. I've got this silo of testers that are going to go and make sure that it works. That's not the case today. Now I need to be able to be responsible for, does it work the way it was intended? Have I written all the tests that I need? Have I run it through security? Again, something that we didn't have back when I started at Veracode. We didn't have an automated system to run these things through. So it was pen testing, it was secure code reviews, things that I had no idea about, things that I did not have that capability for. But you can build these into an automated tool that will show you those vulnerabilities as you go and help you to remediate them as you go. The idea of being able to operate the software, we had separate departments for that. That's not the case with a microservice where you want to deploy it right away. So the difference is all of the things that are required to take an idea all the way into production versus all the things that you need to do to be able to build the function in the first place. So it's multi-technical versus multi-discipline.
Good. All righty. Pete, next one. This is a real world question. What's your recommendation for production support team engineers, OS, middleware, DBAs? What's your recommendation to them to evolve, and continue to have employable skills in this new world, new environment?
Well, that's a really good question.
I thought so.
Yeah. So are there places, so I hear this talk around security a lot too. The security people are worried about, hey, I'm a pen tester, what do I do now? Some of this is start to build out the skill set. Can you write software? So in the case of security, can I write some security libraries for my company, whether that's doing input validation or cleansing functions or those kind of things, where now I start to understand that world of developers. I pick up some of the programming languages that I need to do in my time in doing this work. And by the way, now I've also got to worry about quality and how it gets tested, and can I automate those tests, and how am I going to support the other teammates inside of the organization? So I think in any of those categories, there are places where you can think about, can I create some functionality for my company in the kind of a first-party, third-party library, if you will, where I create some centralized skill set that I maintain for my company, almost as open source, but it's for just for my internal company, and then build on those layers. So here's the software, here are the tests, here are the deployment, here's the configuration, here's the the kind of telemetry. You can start to add all those things into your specialty that allow you to see outside of your world.
Good. Okay. In a similar vein, Pete, we only have a few minutes left. I apologize. As this trend from generalist to specialist continues, what do you see as the next step past full spectrum, if such a thing exists?
Oof, you got me on that one. So that's a stumper.
Yeah, if I knew that, Pete, I wouldn't be doing webinars with you, man. I'd be out in an island somewhere.
Right.
Well, I'm on an island somewhere. But anyway, here's another one. What resources do you recommend to help in the journey to becoming a full spectrum engineer?
So there's a ton of content online to start with. If you think about the security aspect or the quality aspect, certainly operating, there are tons of books out there. So my Kindle is now full of reading material going after these various aspects to be able to understand them at a deeper level. Learn by doing. So this is, there's no better way. I've taught in the past technology. I've never learned the technology so well as when I've had to teach it to somebody else. So if you are a DBA or you are a security expert and you want to get into the coding aspects of this or the testability aspects of this, find someone in your company to sit down at lunch with and noodle through some ideas. Maybe they'll even help you along that path and give you some guidance along the way. So whether it's stuff that you go off and learn either on the internet or something you can find inside of your company, there are people that want to share their abilities with you. And if you do that, you will grow and share back with them and grow towards this model of a full spectrum engineer.
Great. All right, Pete, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I get kind of religious about not going overtime and be respectful of people's time. So we're going to pull the plug on this around now. But I got to tell you, we've got a bunch more questions, buddy, and I'm going to ask Deborah and the team to forward them to you, and maybe in your spare time on a plane or something, if you could write maybe some of the answers down, we'll post them along with the slides and video of this so that people have those answers.
Absolutely. I'm excited to discuss it.
Yeah, no, and it's great to have, we love the interaction. I've done enough of these webinars to know, Pete, when you get a lot of questions, you've done good. So good job, man. I appreciate it. I knew you would, though. Pete Chestna, developer, advocate, evangelist at Verico. Thanks for being our guest on this our webinar, DevOps.com webinar. And just a quick plug, Pete will be on my panel, a DevSecOps panel at Jenkins World in August in San Francisco. So if you are attending Jenkins World, come see Pete, myself, and a few other DevSecOps rock stars as we talk about this and other issues. Pete, thanks very much. Thanks very much to Verico, the CA company, for sponsoring today's event. Most of all, thank you to all of you who shared with us and joined with us today in this webinar. We hope to see you soon on another DevOps.com webinar. Until then, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.